Raghuveer, I just went through yesterday's B2B demo, and thank you for taking that topic as well, including that topic as well in the training. It's really useful.
Great. So as an assignment, you are supposed to do the same configuration for Facebook or any other identity provider, external identity provider that you have access to. Just try and replicate that configuration for another identity provider and see if there is any change in the configuration. Does it require some additional components to be configured, or is it the same concept across other identity providers as well?
Okay,
Okay,
we'll try that. Yeah.
great. Hope my screen is visible to you once again. I had to disable it to just log into my system. So the agenda for today is privileged identity management. As I explained about the identity governance capability of Microsoft Entra ID yesterday, and did talk about how Microsoft Entra ID can help an organization to help them reach the majority stage or the highest maturity stage when it comes to managing identities, when it comes to managing security. And Microsoft Entra ID is not only meant for managing the identities. This service can also provide you other comprehensive security capabilities with respect to managing, managing identity and access management in a private environment, in a public environment, managing identities that belongs to external identities like verified identities, my external identities, permission managements. So it basically provides you a comprehensive capability of services. After Azure Active Directory was renamed as Microsoft Entra ID, Microsoft added some additional capabilities to the service, which are now available as part of Microsoft Entra Suite as well as standalone license. So that's what Microsoft Entra ID governance is. Now, in governance, the first service is privileged identity management, or the most important, most popular service under governance is privileged identity management. So if you have a customer who is using P2 license, it is for sure that they have configured privileged identity management because that's what they start with. P2 would always be privileged identity management. After that, they can configure some additional services, but this would be the first service that you will find your customer configuring when they acquire P2 license. So let's talk about this service. Now, if you have not worked with this service in the past, if this service is new, I will be starting from scratch. If you have worked with this service, if you're currently working with this service as an admin or as a consumer of this service, this session is an opportunity for you to bridge the gap, ask questions, get your doubts clarified that you have had so far and you could not find them. You could not find an answer for your questions, or you could not get your doubts clarified. This session is an opportunity for you to get those clarified. Okay, so let's talk about privileged identity management. I have official Microsoft presentation that I will be using. I have also created my own version of document to explain this service, which I typically deliver in the training sessions, which is comprehensive and contains all the information. And I have my own set of presentations as well. So I will use a combination of these documents to explain the service and run you through all the capabilities that it brings on the table, and you will understand how this service is really important and how this service can help me manage my identities effectively, efficiently, so that I do not have any excessive privileges granted to identities. I do not have any security incident reported in my environment because of misconfigured identities. That's what we are going to do in this session. So let's get started. Now, as the name suggests, privileged identity management. So when you want to understand any service, please try and break that terminology and try to understand in pieces. So privileged identity management, we all know management is the process of managing it, managing the life cycle of a service, controlling the life cycle, making sure that the service remains up to date, optimizing the service. That's what management is all about. let's understand what is privileged and identity. So when it comes to privileged, privileged basically means who is privileged? Someone with higher privileged privileges. That's privileged. Someone with higher privileges is privileged. You already know what an identity is. It could be a user. I'm saying it could be a human identity. It could be a device. It could be an application also. I'm saying when I say application, it could be a managed identity. It could be a service principal. We've already gone through the identity and access management fundamentals. So you know what are different types of identities. So privilege basically means someone with higher privileges, and identity basically means a user, a device. It also includes group, managed identities, and service principal. So identity could be a user, it could be, and when I say user, it could be both. It could be a member user, it could be a guest user also, both. So member user, guest user, any device, any group, any managed identity, service principal, all of them are identities, right? Then comes privileged, which is someone with higher privileges. Now, let's try and relate to our concept of identity and access management best practice. So identity and access management best practice says there is one concept in the best practice that says least privilege principle or principle of least privilege. Now, what this principle says that you should grant least privilege to your identities that will help them to deliver their job role and responsibilities. Least privilege you should grant. So when I say least privilege, let's understand the role also. So in Entra ID and in Azure subscriptions, RBAC, we call it role-based access control, Azure subscription RBAC. So in Entra ID, we have 60 plus roles. We have 60 plus roles in Entra ID, and some of those roles are privileged roles, some of them are normal roles, right? So when it comes to the role, I have a spreadsheet that I maintain here, which contains all the roles of Azure and Entra ID. So on this spreadsheet, I actually dumped it from Entra portal and Azure portal. Here you see all the Entra roles. You see the role name, role display ID, and the description of that role. So if you look at this, I'm saying I only took this information last week. So if you look at this, you have a total of 106 roles now. There used to be 60 plus roles in Azure Active Directory. Slowly, gradually, they added more roles. So there are a total of 106 roles in Entra ID. Now, some of these roles are privileged, some of these roles are regular roles. Similarly, when it comes to Microsoft Azure, you will see we have a total of 465 roles in Microsoft Azure. As as on Thursday last week, because I downloaded it on Thursday, or I dumped it on Thursday. So 465 roles. So we have a total of 600 roles across Entra and 600 plus roles across Entra as well as I would say Azure. Some of these roles are regular roles, some of them are privileged. Now, the least privilege principle says that you should provide reader role or the bare minimum role for an identity. Least privilege role, reader role, or you can say uh, any service specific roles, which is storage, account, editor, or contributor. In the storage account, you have multiple services. So in storage account, you have blob, tables, queues, and files. So depending on what the person is responsible for, you will provide that person appropriate role. So that's principle of least privilege, which is basically trying to say that provide least privilege to your identities. Providing least privilege to your identities. Now, Privileged. So which is a privileged identity? Now I have an identity. Let's say I have a human identity, user identity with the name Eric Jonas. This is my identity. This identity maintains, this identity is given security reader, reports reader on Entra. I'm saying on Entra, these are the roles which are given. Entra rules we can define by, I would say, green font. And then on Azure, this identity is given reader, user, access, administrator, and let's say uh, these two roles, reader and user access administrator role on Azure subscription. Azure subscription roles are defined with yellow. I cannot put yellow, so I'll put amber. So these are the capabilities or privileges that are granted to this identity, right? Then I have another identity, which is, let's say, James Bond. And this person has been granted global admin and global admin at Azure and subscription owner. Global admin. So you already know global admin is an Entra role. So this person has been granted global admin role. And when it comes to subscription owner, this person has been granted subscription owner role at Azure. Now tell me which one of these is a privileged identity? Eric or James? Which one of these is a privileged identity?
James.
Okay, what about
James? James.
James is a privileged identity? All of you agree to this? Okay, actually, both are privileged identities. That's where you need to have good understanding of Azure subscription RBAC and Entra ID roles. Both are privileged identity. I'll show you how. Eric has user access administrator role. Do you know what this role is in Azure? With this role, I can grant other identities access to Azure subscription. I can make them administrator. I can make them subscription owner also with user access administrator role. So Eric has the capability to grant other identities Azure subscription RBAC. And Eric can grant any RBAC. So Eric happens to be a privileged identity. Similarly, the security reader is a privileged identity. Eric can read security information of any identity in Entra. So it happens to be a privileged identity. Let's check it in Entra. So if we navigate to Entra, if I log into Entra now, so under roles, when you navigate to roles and administrators, let me show you about privileged roles in Entra, right? So if I say security, I see a couple of roles here. Look at this role, security reader. It's a privileged role. Security admin is also a privileged role. Security operator is also a privileged role. They're all privileged roles, right? It's not only admin is a privileged role. Reader is also a privileged role because reader can read security information and reports in Microsoft Entra ID as well as Microsoft 365. So it's a privileged role. Now, this column was not there in the past. So when somebody says reader, by default, this thought comes into my mind that reader means regular role. It's not a privileged role. But you need to understand what kind of read capability that reader maintains. If somebody maintains the capability to read all the data from the system, then it's also a privileged role, especially if that relates to security data. So reader is a privileged role. Similarly, global reader is also a privileged role. You can see global reader, it's a privileged role. So if I say global, then all global admins and global reader, it's a privileged role. You can see global admin and global reader, both are privileged roles. Because if global admin can read everything and manage also, I say global admin can manage all aspects of Microsoft Entra ID and Microsoft services that use Microsoft Entra ID, which is Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Dynamics, Share Online, Azure Portal. It can manage all of it. But global reader can read everything that a global administrator can, but not update anything. But if somebody has read capability, is that not a privileged role? That person will know everything, and that person can further damage you, can further corrupt the services with some combinations or try and get the information. If I know all VIP users in your company, is that not a data leakage? If I am able to modify their properties, then only you would consider a data leak? No. Knowing privileged identities is also a data leak, is also a vulnerability in the system. So these are privileged roles. Now, when it comes to privileged roles, and if you want to know what all privileged roles are available, you can basically click on privileged tab and it will list all the privileged roles here. So these are all the privileged roles in Entra ID. And you will say that even if this doesn't say administrator, it says application developer, it still happens to be a privileged role. For example, it doesn't say administrator, directory writers, it still happens to be a privileged role. This is a reader, but it still happens to be a privileged role. All related to security, anything that says security is a privileged role. User administrator is a privileged role because this administrator has the capability to manage, to create users or modify user properties. So it says can manage all aspects of users in group, including resetting passwords for limited admins. So till this point, you have privileged roles, right? After that, you will still see administrators, but they are not privileged roles because they are administrator to a specific service or a specific capability. And damage to that service of or capability will not corrupt my entire process, will not impact my entire operations. So that's why they are not privileged roles. But you will see a lot administrative, cloud app security admin, right? You will see desktop analytics admin, you will see exchange admin, groups administrator, other identity governance administrator, somebody who can manage the entire identity governance capability. But even though it's not a privileged role, so Entra, Microsoft, when it comes to Entra service, it was a thoughtful process to identify what role are privileged and what role are not privileged. Not every role can be a privileged role, and you have 106 roles as we speak today, right? So that's the difference between privileged and non-privileged role. Now, similarly, if you go to Microsoft Azure subscription, you will find privileged roles there also. So if I click on access control, and if I click on roles here, I will see all of these roles here. Microsoft Azure doesn't have an option to showcase which one is privileged, which one is not privileged. However, you see here, they have a separate category for it. In that category, they say privileged administrator roles. All these 6 roles that you see here, they are privileged roles. And user administrator falls here. It will let you manage user access to Azure resources. With this role, I can grant somebody a owner access also, contributor access also. So this happens to be a privileged role. Am I making sense, guys?
Yes, Raghav.
Great. So as I said, even if you are using this service, today is an opportunity to bridge the gap that you have had in your knowledge, which you did not know about. For example, for you, user access administrator was not a privileged role, or security reader was not a privileged role. But now you realize that it is actually a privileged role, or it falls under privileged role definition. Okay. So coming back to the
But within your example, Raghuveer, you have mentioned two examples, right? But within that two examples, the more privileged one is James, right?
yeah, that's the next question.
Comparing, yeah.
Yeah, that's the next question. Both of them are privileged identities. I'm trying to help you understand the definition of a privileged identity. Management is
Got it.
something that we will do later on, but let's first understand the meaning of privileged identity. That who is a privileged identity, right? So both are privileged identity. They both are privileged identity. Now, if you want to rate both the identities, that out of these two identities, which one is more privileged, then I would say James Bond is more privileged. And as the name suggests in Bond movies, so that person was the more privileged one. Right? That person would have access to all the latest technology gadgets, technologies that you have not even thought of, but those technologies were fitted in his car. Right? So he used to be the most privileged one. That's the reason I put this name so that you will understand the concept here. So admin and subscription owner, more privileged. Now you will not find James Bond typically in your production environment. James Bond would always be the customer or somebody at customer side. And also you will not have one James Bond there. There will be multiple James Bond. There will be multiple privileged identities at customer side who would maintain global admin and subscription owner capabilities. Why? Because if you have only one global admin, what if that role is compromised? You will lock out yourself. You will have to approach Microsoft to get your access back. So it is recommended that you have a minimum of 2 to 3 global admins, not 100, a minimum of 2 to 3 global admins. And similarly, you should have a break glass account here also, which is a minimum of 2, 3 subscription owner who can manage the show. So you will not find one James Bond. You will find many, but the numbers will be limited, not more than 2, 3, 5. 5 would be the maximum number that we can think. And in a managed service organization or managed security service organizations, you will not find yourself getting these roles. You will be given a role which is a level below, depending on the capability that you are managing, right? So you may get security admin role instead of global admin. If you need to manage the security, identity, and access management for your customer, instead of granting you owner role, your customer can provide you contributor. And if you are in the business of managing other users for your customer, you will be granted user access administrator role. That's it. You will be granted these two roles. Owner, there is a low probability that you will ever get an owner role. Similarly, when it comes to Entra ID, if you are in the business of managing security for your customer, you will be granted security admin role. This is the role. It can read security information and reports and manage configurations in Microsoft Entra ID and Office 365. You will be able to manage all configurations. You can create. I'm saying you will be able to do a lot of capabilities when it comes to this role. So you can manage all the configurations. If you want to go to the description, you can see this is what you can do. All of this. So you have the capability to read all the information, manage all these. This is the capabilities mentions, and it also mentions that what specific action out of these capabilities is privileged. This is privileged action. Updating the federation. So your company has, federation with Google enabled. Security admin will go to all identity providers, click on Google and change the client ID or secret. Update. This is a privileged capability, right? As long as you're able to read, it's not privileged. So it basically mentions that out of these actions that a security administrator can take, what are privileged actions? Now, if you want, now this is where custom role comes into the picture. You don't want to grant privileged capabilities. However, you want to grant most of the capabilities. So what you can do, you can create a custom role from here, and you can remove all of these privileged actions from this role and then grant somebody a security access. So the person can manage majority of the task, but will not be able to update any privileged configuration. That's what privileged identity management is all about. Am I making sense, guys? Okay. So let's move on. So coming back to the same, so Eric and James, they both are privileged identities. If I have another identity, which is say, so let's take another identity, Gaurav Sharma. And if Gaurav Sharma is granted roles like reader, storage account admin, so Gaurav Sharma maintains these roles. Reports reader in Entra, and reader and storage account admin in Microsoft Azure. Now, is Gaurav a privileged identity or Gaurav a regular identity? What do you think? Is Gaurav a privileged or regular identity?
Still privileged, I think.
Okay, Gaurav is a regular identity here. Why? Look at the roles. Reports reader. Gaurav can read the reports. Reader, which has the capability to read all the configurations of the subscription, and then storage account admin. So it seems that Gaurav is probably a storage and database admin. His core skills is into storage management or database management. That is why he has been given storage account admin role. Right, storage account. Now there is no admin here in Azure. You have contributor. So Gaurav is given this role. Gaurav is a normal identity, not a privileged identity, as per the definition. If you go by the definition of this, I'm saying you can see over here, if I go to roles and if you go by the definition, reports reader, this role is not a privileged role. So Gaurav is not a privileged identity. Then if I navigate to subscription, if I look into the roles here also, I would see that these are the privileged roles. If I click on here, any of the role that Gaurav has doesn't fall here. Gaurav has reader and storage account contributor role. They don't fall here. They fall here under job functions role. I'll show you. This is reader role. And if you want to see storage account contributor, over here, storage account contributor. So they both the roles fall under job functions roles. And hence, Gaurav is not a privileged identity. This is how the definition of privileged identity is as per Microsoft. However, you don't go by Microsoft all the time. You use your own brain to work. So my brain or my experience is not agreeing that Gaurav is not a privileged identity. For me, Gaurav is also a privileged identity because Gaurav has storage account contributor role. With this role, storage account contributor role, Gaurav can manage storage accounts, including accessing storage accounts, access keys, which provides. So Gaurav can manage all of it, which means access key, which provides full access to storage account data. Somebody who has full access to storage account data, and storage account involves blob, file, queues, and tables. And we have contributor also here. For blob, there is a contributor. For file, there is a contributor. You can see storage file data privilege contributor. You have storage queue data contributor. You have storage table data contributor. I could have provided one of these roles to Gaurav, but now Gaurav maintains storage account contributor, which means by default, Gaurav is a contributor for all the services which are part of storage account. So from my experience, from my logic, I will not agree to the point that Gaurav is not a privileged identity. For me, Gaurav is a privileged identity, right? And since for me, Gaurav is a privileged identity, there has to be a service in Microsoft Entra that I can leverage to decide who is my privileged identity and who is a regular identity. And I will be able to manage all my privileged identities in that service. And when I say I am able to manage those privileged identities, I'm trying to say that I should be able to manage what privileged what privileged access those identities will be granted, when they will be granted privileged access, for how long they will be granted privileged access. When they are granted privileged access, would they be notifying others, probably their managers or global administrators or security admins? When their privileged access expires, how it will be renewed? Will their access be permanent? Which means Gaurav joined today, Gaurav will be granted permanent storage account contributor access because he's a storage account admin. He has come from storage background. All of these questions. So I need a service in Azure, in Entra, that can help me manage all these aspects. And that service is Privileged Identity Management Service. So with this service, I can manage my privileged identities. All of these are privileged identities. Gaurav is not a privileged identity as per Microsoft Entra or as per Azure, but for me, Gaurav is also a privileged identity because I see Gaurav maintaining this role, and this role is a privileged role for me. Right? So all of them are privileged identities, and I will need to manage them well. Now, what privileged identity management principle says? So now that you have a clear identification of what is a privileged identity, what is not a privileged identity. So all of them are privileged identity. However, if I have another user, let's say Romil Sharma, and if I grant Romil, access like reader access in Microsoft Azure, because Romil is, let's say Romil has just joined the organization and Romil needs to learn the business. He is new to Azure space. He is new to Entra space. He's just joined the organization as a campus graduate. So Romil needs to learn things, and Romil will be provided a lot of trainings, a lot of mentoring by by his colleagues. So Romil is currently being granted a reader role. He has not been granted any role on Entra. He has been granted a reader role on Microsoft Azure subscription. In this case, Romil becomes a regular identity. Non-privileged means regular identity. So we all will collectively agree that yes, Romil is a regular identity. However, I cannot I cannot have Romil as a regular identity all the time. Romil will start to learn things. Romil will be, he will be made to sit with an Entra admin, and Romil will learn how to provision users and groups in Entra. That's the very simple task that he will learn. Now, one fine day, when Romil is asked to create a user in Entra ID, a user or a guest or a group, Romil will not be able to do it with this role. So Romil will need some additional capability. Romil will need user administrator role. This role Romil needs. If Romil needs to create a user. Now this role, I can't grant to Romil because it's my privileged role, and Romil is just 1 month old in the organization. I still don't have confidence on his capabilities. So what I will do, if he is asked to create a user and he needs to do that, there is nobody else who is there who can take care of this role. I would not grant this role to Robin from Entra. I'm saying I will not navigate to Entra service. So I will not do this here. I will not click on this role and add Romil here. This is what I'm not doing. I'm not granting Romil user administrator role from here. Because if I grant Romil user administrator role, for as long as he maintains that role to his identity, he will be a user administrator. He is being asked to create a user, which would hardly take 5 minutes. So I need a capability using which I can grant Romil user administrator role for 5 minutes so that he can complete his job. And after 5 minutes, that role is automatically revoked, gone away. It is removed from Romil's identity. That is the capability that I need. First, I have a lot of work. I cannot just keep managing who I have granted what role, for how long I have granted, and now is the time to remove that role. That is where privileged identity management service comes into the picture. So privileged identity management service is a service in Entra ID that enables you means administrators, that enables administrators to manage, control, and monitor access to important resources in your organization. So manage, control, and monitor. Manage basically means the ability to decide whether you want to do this, whether you want to grant a privileged role, whether you want to grant somebody some level of access. Control, whether they will be able to perform some actions or activities. Monitor, you should always have clear visibility of what identity is maintaining which privilege. So this service will allow you to enable, manage, control, and monitor access to important resources. Now, what are my important resources in my organization? My important resources are my workloads, my applications, my services, or my instances of my services. Like a virtual machine that I have created is a resource. It's an instance of a service. So compute is the service, or virtual machine is the service that Microsoft provides. When I create a virtual machine, it's a resource for me. So I will be able to manage, monitor access to my important resources, which are my virtual machines, my databases, my users, Entra related resources. So whatever you find in Entra is also a resource. Similarly, whatever you see in Azure subscription is a resource. So I will be able to manage my resource. These resources include resources in Microsoft Entra ID. Now they are defining the resource. So resource doesn't always mean a virtual machine storage account or network, virtual network. It also means resource in Microsoft Entra ID, Azure, in Azure subscription, and other Microsoft online services, such as Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Intune. So that's what a resource basically means. This is a resource here. All the capabilities that you will find in Entra, in Azure, and other Microsoft online services will be a resource. That's what privileged identity management is. So it's a method through which you can manage resources. Now, I want you to, I'm sharing this Word document with all of you. I want you to read this Word document. I'll give you 10 minutes to read this Word document, and then I will talk about how do we, then I will talk about these concepts. So, so as I said, this document, this Word document, the content has been taken from official Microsoft privileged identity management documentation on Microsoft website. However, I have summarized it from multiple documentations to create a crisp and combined document to summarize the entire service. So let's understand. So what is PIM? It's a service in Microsoft Entra ID that enables admins to manage, control, and monitor access to important resources in the organization. Now, those resources are Microsoft Entra ID, Azure subscription, and other Microsoft online services, such as Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Intune. In what scenario should I be using PIM, or what is my use case? Use case is that if, as an administrator, I want to manage, control, protect, and monitor access to privileged resources. Now, what are my privileged resources? My workloads. It is both access to privileged resources as well as identities. When an identity becomes privileged, when that identity is granted privileged role. When my resources becomes privileged, they are always privileged. They don't become privileged and non-privileged. If I have a mission critical application, which is rated as mission critical, I'm saying in a business, in a production environment, you will have applications rated as high critical, medium critical, low critical, right? So if I have a mission critical application, it will always remain mission critical. It will not be rated as privileged and non-privileged. So my resources will always be privileged. However, my identities will be privileged and non-privileged based on the action that they can perform on these resources. So if I have an identity, if I have a privileged application, let's say mission critical application, and the identity is Romil, then I don't need to bother about it. Why? Because Romil is not a privileged identity here. Romil only has reader access. So with this level of access, Romil doesn't become a privileged identity. So I don't need to bother about it. However, my application will remain privileged. So that's what you need to understand, the difference between privileged identity and privileged resource, such as workload application services in an organization. Why should I use why should an organization use PIM? They should use PIM because it aligns with principle of least privilege and zero trust. Zero trust basically means tomorrow Romil can come to let's say I'm the team manager and Romil is part of my team. It's been 3 months in the system and Romil has really performed well. I have got all great feedback for Romil. Now Romil approaches me and say, "Sir, do you really not trust me? I'm saying I've been here for the last 3 months and you have not elevated my access. You have not been approved my admin access. But now I know all admin work. I can deliver all the admin capabilities. Please grant me admin access." And I say, Romil, we won't do that. That's against the best practices of our business unit. And Romil says, you don't trust me? Is this about trust? No, it's not about human trust. It's about zero trust. Zero trust. So what zero trust principle says that don't trust nobody. Don't trust yourself also. Trust nobody, always verify, assume that breach has happened. These are the three main tenets of zero trust principle. So PIM aligns with both principle of least privilege and zero trust. So to answer Romil, I would say Romil, as and when you need to perform any privileged action, I would make sure to grant you that capability for the time being so that you can deliver your privileged action, and I can ensure that after that time frame is over, you are back as a normal identity and I can sleep peacefully that my identity and access management business is running smoothly, efficiently as per the best practices of identity and access management. So that's about zero trust. It reduces the chances of a malicious actor getting access to privileged resources. It reduces. Why? Because if I grant Romil a privileged access for 10 minutes, and within those 10 minutes, Romil is actually performing that action. After 10 minutes, that privileged access will be revoked. If there's a malicious malware rogue user in the system who is trying to hack into Romil's identity, by the time they're able to hack into Romil's identity, Romil will be back as reader. So what would you achieve? You would not achieve anything because Romil doesn't have any access now. So it reduces the chance. However, on the other hand, if I make Romil, so let's say Romil was supposed to manage a tenant. It's a tenant related. Okay, so there was a task which is create there was a task which is synchronize identities from an additional domain, and the domain is xyz.com. There was a task, and Romil wanted to perform this task. So what I did as part of this task, because this task is only possible when Romil has what level of access, guys? What level of access is needed to perform this task from Entra perspective? If you want to synchronize identities from an additional domain with to your Microsoft Entra ID, what role do you need from Entra? We did that synchronization, right? We spent almost 2 days. One day it did not get right. Second day it worked perfectly fine. What role did we assign? When we were configuring that Entra Connect Sync, what role did we need from Entra to configure it?
Is it hybrid identity?
Hybrid identity admin? No. It required
Global admin.
It
Global
clearly
admin.
it global admin, right? So I will need to provide global admin role. So if I want Romil to perform this activity, I will have either I can provide him global admin role, or I can share a generic account, you can call it generic or service account, or principal, with this privilege, global admin privilege. In both cases, I'm granting Romil global admin capabilities. Either I'm granting global admin role to his identity, or I'm sharing another identity credentials which has this capability. In both cases, I am sharing the excessive privileges with Romil at this point in time. So let's say Romil gets this privilege, global admin privilege. I assign him as a permanent role and I forget, or probably I assign him and then I thought by the end of today, when I leave for home, I will revoke that access. Romil is done with this activity within half an hour. Within half an hour, he was done with this activity and he gets back to work. The other work that he needs to do. He gets back to his learning exercise. And at the same time, there was a malicious actor in the network, or there was a brute force attack that happened, and that attack happened on Romil's identity, and Romil's identity is compromised. Now, since his identity is compromised, and since this identity happens to have global admin access as we speak, imagine the quantum of damage that can happen. With this access, anything can be done on Entra. I'm saying with this access, you can quickly go ahead and delete all the users. Nobody will stop you. It's like deltree star.star. There is a command in command prompt. When I was learning DOS back in 2000, I'm saying the one who was teaching me DOS, he basically shared all the commands that this is how you create a directory, this is how you remove a directory, this is how you modify a directory, this is how you modify the attributes of a directory and whatnot. He did not teach me this command, which is this command. Deltree star. This command was not taught to me because this command is a destructive command. With this command, I can delete everything. And this command has no stoppage. You execute this command, you can't interrupt it in between. So with global admin access, if his identity is compromised, see what will happen. This identity is compromised, he'll be able to select all of these 21 users and hit delete. The moment I hit OK, all of these 21 users will get deleted. I will not delete that, but I'm telling you that this can also happen. in one go, he can delete all 21 users, right? So let's say instead of 21, I'll show you just for 2 users. Example test user, and let's say the sample user, right? So delete, gone. Why? Because Entra admin has global admin access. Nobody questions a global admin. Now, after this, what he will do, he will go to deleted users so that these are not able to recover. And so he can just select all the deleted users and say delete permanently. Done. Go back home. Your business is done. The admin will lose his job that day only. All the users are deleted. Done. Now, even if those users were getting synchronized from on-premises, it will take time for them to come into Entra, and then those users will need to be granted appropriate access, appropriate roles in Entra and subscription. That part you cannot recover because all users are deleted. It will take a couple of days. Imagine if there are 100,000 users, it will take a couple of days to recover everything, to reconfigure all the permissions. Couple of days. That's the capability of a global admin. That is why global admin is a privileged role. So what I will do, I will not, it's not about trust that I don't trust Robin. It is about management. It is about how do I manage my affairs. So I will not grant him global admin role permanently. I would say, okay, Romil, you need to perform this activity. I anticipate that it will not take more than 15 minutes. I have actually performed this activity in the past from my experience, because I also come from the same, the same role. I basically got promoted. I started as L1, L2, L3, and then became a manager. So Romil, I will not grant you permanently this role. What I will do, I am granting you for 20 minutes global admin access. Go ahead and do your job. If you are not able to complete your job in those 20 minutes, I will give you another 20 minutes. But I cannot give you an hour at a stretch, or I cannot permanently assign this role, or I cannot do it for today. That's what privileged identity management is all about. So that's exactly what says that if you have privileged identity management configured, it reduces the chances of a malicious actor getting access to privileged resources. It also ensures that an authorized user is not inadvertently impacting a sensitive resource. This is another thing. So they are not accidentally or by mistake impacting a sensitive resource. Now, what if Romil is not happy and Romil intentionally deletes everything? This will be known as insider threat. If Romil does it intentionally after gaining global admin access, the one that I was showing you, delete all user and then delete them from deleted also, then it would be an insider threat. Then it's my fault that I should have anticipated that my employee is not happy or my employee has malified intention. My employee would do something similar. It's an insider threat. And this is one type, this is one threat for which there is no solution available. Any solution which is there, any security solution which exists can prevent it up to a certain extent, but not 100%, because you can't read somebody's mind. You don't have that technology yet. So then it will be insider threat. So that's what this says, that it will also ensure that an authorized user is not accidentally or intentionally impacting a sensitive resource. Now, what are my features? So my features of PIM are this. This is very important. I have highlighted the main feature. For example, it provides just-in-time privileged access to Microsoft Entra ID and Azure resources. Just in time. Just in time basically means, as I gave you the example, I would provide 15 minutes of access to Romil. Assign time-bound access to resources using start and end date. When I provide access to Romil, I would provide, so there are two things that I will do. I will provide him a capability of global admin, but he will be eligible for global admin. He will not permanently maintain global admin privileges. Whenever he needs global admin privileges, he will elevate his access. That will be just in time. It will require approval to activate the privileged role. So if I'm providing Romil multiple roles, for example, if I am providing Romil roles like global admin, security admin, user admin, group admin, application admin, etc. These are the roles that I'm providing. I'm making him eligible for these roles. So what I will do for certain roles, I would say you need to come and seek approval. For example, global admin. When he tries to use this role, he needs an approval. Global admin and security admin, I would say. But when it comes to user admin, probably an approval is not needed. I would rather say MFA is sufficient. Just make sure that he goes through an MFA challenge, and that's more than sufficient. However, so user admin and group admin, MFA is sufficient. For application admin, I would rather say go ahead and directly take this role. You don't need any approval. You don't need any MFA. Depending on how privileged that role is, how critical that role is. That's exactly what it says here, which is require approval to activate. Enforce multi-factor authentication to activate. Use justification to understand why users activate. So when he activates a role that he is eligible for, he will need to provide justification. Why is he activating this role? And that justification may also involve providing the service request. Include service request or incident ID. So if Romil is performing some action as part of a service request that has been assigned to him or an incident that he is assigned to, that he's responsible to resolve, and as part of that he is activating his role, a privileged role, then in the justification he can mention the service request number or incident ID. So that way we will have a log of these activities. Get notification when privileged roles are activated. When Romil is activating this role, which is global admin, with this role, he needs an approval. The approval will be provided by an admin, an approver, but all the admins will receive a notification that a global admin role has been activated by Romil Sharma, so that they will all be aware of this activity. A global admin can impact other global admins also. So they are aware that, okay, Romil is working on it. Don't worry. He is a sincere resource. He's a senior resource. He's a subject matter expert. We don't need to bother about it. Conclude access reviews to ensure all users still need roles. So now that Romil is now that he has been there in the system, he really performed well and he has been promoted to team lead position. As part of his role, now he's managing business expectations, business and customer expectations, as well as team management. So he hardly gets into any privileged activity, or he hardly gets into any day-to-day work. So which means he doesn't need global admin role anymore. That is where the access review comes into the picture. So the admin, privileged identity admin, the PIM admin, will do the access reviews on regular basis and see whether my identity still requires a role, whether my identities would need some additional roles, whether there are roles that needs to be revoked. All that will be done during that review. So it supports access review to ensure all users still need roles. Download audit history for internal or external audit. Definitely when the audit happens, the auditors would be more interested in understanding who are privileged admins and how are you managing them. So you will be able to show them the audit history and say, see, we use privileged identity management capability from Microsoft Entra. Here's the configuration for our privileged admins, and you can see a log of all the activities that they have done in the last 1 month, 2 months, and you can see how did we manage those activities or those roles assignments, all that. Prevents removal of last active global administrator, privileged role administrator role assignments. So this is one capability that it would not allow, which is if there was a last active global admin, you cannot remove that global admin and privileged role administrator. these two roles you cannot remove, which means somebody with global admin role, let's say Romil activates global admin role, then Romil cannot remove the last active global admin and privileged role admin. So privileged role admin or privileged identity admin is one role that is needed to manage PIM service. So Romil will not be able to remove these two roles. This is done to prevent damage. So this is about privileged identity management. This feature was not available. I have only seen this feature getting added most recently. So this is about features of PIM. So these 10 features summarizes PIM, all the capabilities that you do. Let's talk about some additional requirements. If you want to use PIM, you will need Microsoft Entra ID P2 license. So the one who is configuring the PIM service, the one who is responsible to manage the PIM service, the one who is working as a PIM approver, the role approver will require P2 license. The one who are consuming the PIM service, like Romil doesn't need P2 license. Romil is good to go with free license also. But as a PIM admin, I would need P2 license to configure the service. If you want to understand licensing fundamentals for all identity governance service, this is a great article that you can go through. Over here, you see this table. This table summarizes all licenses against capabilities. That if you want a specific capability, then what kind of license you need. It has all the capabilities. I'm saying free, P1, P2, governance, as well as suite. It doesn't involve, because under suite, it includes permissions management, Entra internet access, private access, and you also have separate licenses available for those capabilities. So this table talks about everything. So let's go to privileged identity management and let's see what do we need over here. Privileged identity management. So for privileged identity management, I need these three, the last three, which is either P2, governance license, or Entra suite. So these are expensive licenses. I'm saying P2 is like $9, this is $12, this is $15. That's how it is. So you need a minimum of P2 license for it. Now, who can do what? So you need to understand that when it comes to PIM service, who can do what? That's very important concept. So for Microsoft Entra roles, if you want to manage Microsoft Entra roles, remember I showed you this spreadsheet that contains all the roles. So if you want to manage in PIM service, if you want to manage Microsoft Entra role, then you need this level of access. Then you need either privileged role administrator role assigned to your identity or global admin role assigned to your identity. Forget about global admin role. You may not get it. You will get privileged role administrator role assigned to your identity. So with one of these two roles, you will be able to manage assignment for other administrators. When I say other administrators, other roles, and roles include normal roles as well as administrator roles, right? Now, these are the roles that will be able to see PIM portal and the assignments. So other global admins, security admins, global readers, security readers, they can also view assignments to Microsoft Entra roles in privileged identity management. Now, you know why did I say that security reader and global reader is a privileged role? Because they have this capability. They can't manage PIM service, but they can read all the configuration of PIM service. They can identify. I'm saying, imagine there's an insider threat. There is a user who a user with security reader or global reader role goes into PIM service and quickly checks who all are given global administrator role. And that information is shared with some external person who tries to hack into the system with that identity. So that is why these are privileged roles. So these roles can read PIM information and these roles can manage PIM configuration, PIM service configuration. Similarly, PIM also manages Azure role. So for Azure resource role, what do you need? The same read. For Azure resource role, privileged identity in privileged identity management service, you need subscription administrator role, resource owner role, or resource user access administrator role. So basically you need subscription admin, which is owner, or user access administrator, or resource owner role. If you are granting access to a storage account to somebody in PIM, then you must be an owner of that storage account. And how do you become an owner? Either you have access at the resource level, or at the subscription level, and by default, storage is part of that subscription. So this is what you need to manage PIM service. And now who will have access? Who will have access to read the configuration? Any user who has privileged role administrator, security administrator, security reader. These three roles from above, plus Azure specific roles. It says any user which has privileged role administrator, security administrator, and security reader. They cannot read assignments that are given to Azure resources. Why? Because these roles are not for Azure. These roles are for Entra ID. But in Azure, any user, so they cannot, it says not by default have access to Azure resources and privileged identity management. Now, role assignment overview. So it says PIM keeps you informed by sending you and other participants email notifications as and when a role is assigned, as and when a role is activated. PIM will send a notification to others. When I say others, other PIM admins, other global admins. These emails might also include links to relevant tasks, such as activating approval or deny a request. So when these notification goes, in the notification, you will also see a link that you can click on to allow or deny a role. I'm saying to approve or deny a request. However, PIM roles activation request can only be approved via PIM portal. So remember this line, this is very important. Some people do not have clarity on this part. This is very important that you need to understand. In the email, you will only contain the link to approve or deny a request. You will need to click on that link that will directly take you to the PIM portal, and you can only approve or deny from the PIM portal. That's the concept. So it has to be done from PIM. PIM doesn't have the capability to do it from the email itself. You will have to log into the PIM service. Some terminologies that you need to be aware of. Just-in-time access, that's exactly what PIM does. A model in which users receive temporary permissions to perform privileged tasks. That's exactly what I was talking about. So Romil gets a temporary permission for a limited time frame to perform a privileged task, which prevents malicious or unauthorized users from gaining access after the permissions have expired. Access is granted only when users need it. So it's not that Romil needs it. It's that there is a need of that role. There is an incident, there is a service request that Romil is currently working on, and that is where there is a need of that role. Principle of least privilege, a recommended security practice in which every user is provided with only minimum privileges needed to accomplish the task. Then you need to understand some terminologies related to PIM. What is an eligible? So whenever you see eligible, it basically means under eligible, if you find a role, it means that the role assignment that requires a user to perform one or more action to use the role. So if you find eligible, it basically means that the user is eligible to use this role. However, before using this role, user must perform one or more action. Action could be activate the role. Action could be do MFA. Action could be provide justification. Action could be wait for an approval to approve your role, that action. If a user has been made eligible for a role, that means that they can activate the role when they need to perform privileged tasks. There is no difference in the access given to someone with a permanent versus an eligible role. So the same example here, James Bond, who has global admin role as we speak, as well as Romil, who has been granted, who has got his global admin role activated for some task. He needs to perform some tasks. So what Romil did, he activated global admin role. Now at this moment, James Bond and Romil, they are at par. They have the same capability. The difference is Romil has this capability only for, let's say, 30 minutes. And James Bond has this capability permanent. That's the only difference. But for next 30 minutes, they both are at the same level. That's what it basically means. That's what this statement means, that there is no difference in the access given to someone with permanent versus an eligible role assignment. The only difference is that some people do not need that access all the time. That's exactly what is happening here. Romil doesn't need it all the time. but James Bond need it all the time because he's your global admin, and there has to be a minimum of 2 to 3 global admins as a B class account. Active. So in case of James Bond, it is active because it's a permanent assignment. In case of Romil, it is eligible. An active role assignment that does not require user to perform any action to use the role. User assigned as active when have the privileges assigned to the role. Activate. Activate is related to eligible. So if you are eligible, then you will activate the role. The process of performing one or more action to use a role that a user is eligible for. Action might include performing a MFA, providing a business justification, or requesting approval from designated approvers. So these are the actions. Assigned. When you see assigned in front of a role against a user, it means a user that has an active role assignment. Assigned basically means for James Bond, it will say assigned, and for Romil, it will say activated. Because Romil has an eligible role that he activated, which got activated successfully. Now the status of the role shows as activated, and along with activated, it would also show the expiration time frame, that when this will expire. A user that has an eligible role performed the action to activate the role and is now active. Once activated, the user can use the role for pre-configured period of time before they need to activate again. Extend. Now the role is activated for Romil, and Romil is performing some this same synchronization activity. However, he came across some error and he started troubleshooting. And now it's almost 27 minutes, and he still needs this role for another 7 minutes. So what Romil will do, Romil will go back to the PIM portal. Romil will extend the role. He will put a request for extension. And since it's a critical role, it will trigger an approval workflow. The approver will receive the notification. He or she will approve the role and also look for business justification, what Romil has put for an additional extension. And also he can deny the role also, or he can call Romil and understand the situation. If there is any, I'm saying, if you are using a PIM service and if there is any misconfiguration or any unwanted activity that appears in the system, then both user and admin will be responsible. So it is a shared responsibility. User and admin both will be responsible. User because it is his or her account which got compromised, and admin because it is he or her who basically activated that role or approved that role activation. Extend, then renew. Renew basically means when you click an eligible role, there is a time frame. You select it for 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, 15 days, and then you renew it basically. So once that is nearing expiration, you will renew it. So that's what these are the terminologies that you need to be aware of. Now, PIM also works well in case of a project which is of short duration. For example, in the afternoon batch yesterday, one of the participants, she basically told me that she's working with a customer. When I was done with the federated identity demo, she really liked that concept. She really found it useful, and she said that I don't know why my customer was not using it or why my customer is not using it, but we have a lot of contractors. We have created accounts for them in our Entra ID as an employee, and we have granted permissions accordingly. We don't federate with their identity provider. So I asked why you didn't do it. She said that this was, I'm saying she had no explanation. And that's when she said that she would now go back to her business and ask the same question, that why did you not federate and you rather went with creating their accounts? Now imagine a situation that let's say you need some assistance with an external vendor for a very short duration, probably for 15 days, for 2 weeks. The vendor needs to provide some employees, some of his or her resources to you for 2 weeks. Would you create their accounts? Would you create their member accounts in Active Directory or in Entra ID for 15 days and grant them access to your environment? And then after 15 days, you would then remove them? It's an unnecessary administrative overhead. And this will also give you a red flag during audit, the auditors will ask you the same question. They will look at the frequency of identity lifecycle management. They will see that in your environment, you are creating and deleting accounts so frequently. So you will also get a red flag there during audit. So the right approach in that case is go with federation. This is only for 15 days. Even if this is for 6 months or 1 year, go with federation. But if you feel that this vendor is permanent for next 5 years, 10 years, then you can probably create an employee account with some identification prefix or suffix in the UPN that will help you to recognize about that identity, whether it's a permanent identity, whether it's a full-time employee or a vendor employee in your system. So that's very important. So PIM works well here also. In this scenario, wherein you are dealing with a client, with a vendor for a short duration, you can have federation configured by creating guest users and then assign those guest users these PIM, I'm saying, and then manage those guest users here through PIM service. So that way you will ensure that you are not granting them privileged access for a longer duration they need it. Okay, some of the scenarios that you need to aware. First, privileged role administrator permissions. Now, when it comes to PIM, as I said, if you want to manage this role, PIM capability, then you need to either have privileged role administrator access or global admin role access. So it says that privileged role administrator permissions, somebody with this role. If you are a privileged role admin, you can enable approval for specific roles. You can specify approver users or group to approve request. You can view request and approval history for all privileged roles. So you can configure, you can enable, you can specify, modify, and you can view it. Approver permissions. Approver is another member that complements this capability. So you can identify approvers. Approvers are other identities in your system who you trust for being sincere and knowledgeable and subject matter expert to decide whether that activation request should be allowed or denied. So approvers can view pending approvals, approve or reject request for role elevation, whether it's a single role, single request or multiple requests, provide justification for my approval or rejection. When they approve or reject, they will provide justification. So that's the approver permissions in PIM portal. Then you have third level, which is eligible role user permission. Now this is ROMEL. So ROMEL can request activation of a role that requires approval. ROMEL can view the status of request to activate. Let's say ROMEL requested to elevate global admin role, which triggered an approval workflow. The email notification is sent to all the approvers. However, nobody has approved it. So ROMEL in his portal can quickly see the status of the request, whether it is pending approval, whether it was rejected by one of the approver. And if it is rejected, ROMEL can once again request for elevation. Or if it is pending, then ROMEL can probably call an approver over the phone and say, hey, can you please approve my request? I am supposed to do some critical task, on urgent basis. Then complete your task in Microsoft Entra ID if activation was approved. So once the activation was approved, ROMEL can proceed with completing the action. Service request or incident that he is currently working with. So that's about eligible role user permissions. That is all about from theoretical perspective. I have made sure to include every minute aspect of PIM service here. As I said, this is a very important service, and 99% of the customer with P2 license would use this service. So this was every minute aspect that I put together on this document. I already shared this write-up with you. That will help you. Now let's see what Microsoft official presentation say about it. And we'll quickly go through the slides and see if there is anything that we have not seen here. So just in time, just enough, privileged admin workflow, audit ready. That's what privileged identity management is. We have seen all of it. It says privileged identity management, manage and audit admin roles across Microsoft Entra ID and M365. We discussed about it. And it says just in time access, approval workflows, get alerts when activation happens. We talked about it, all of it. Privileged identity management, it shows you the flow that this is how it happens. Users, then you have administrators, Then administrator privilege expires after a specific interval and then it becomes user. So it says that there is a user who has an eligible role assigned. User elevates the role, becomes an administrator for next 4 hours. Once that 4 hours duration expires, it becomes a user once again. So this is the workflow. That's exactly what I explained. And while this user becomes an administrator, you can enforce MFA, you can enforce the approval workflow. What can you manage in PIM? All these three things: Azure roles, Entra roles, and groups. Now, group management capability was added recently in PIM. It was not there in the past. I will explain you all these three in the demo. What can you manage for Azure roles? You can manage all Azure roles. So obviously, you will not manage reader role in Azure, which is a normal role, regular role. You will manage privileged roles, and you can manage those roles across management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, and resources. Microsoft Entra ID roles you can manage, all privileged roles, and groups you can also manage. It says PIM for groups allows you to set up just-in-time access to members and owners role for a Microsoft Entra security group. Alternatively, you can use these groups for Microsoft Entra ID roles and Azure roles assignment and other permissions within Microsoft Online Services. So I'll show you a demo for all three. It shows privileged identity management high level flow. This is how it starts. That bring under the management, you bring a user an identity under PIM by making him applicable for Azure roles and groups. Then you define the role settings. You make him eligible or permanent. Then if eligible, then the person will do the activation. Activation will trigger an approval or rejection. And after approved, while doing that activity, if you ever need to extend, you can extend. Or once that role, when you click on eligible, you define a duration. Once this duration is expired, you can renew it. You can request for renewal. And while you are doing all of this, alerts are getting triggered, so everyone is getting notified. The identified recipients are getting notified. You can do an audit and you can also do review. PIM assignments type. You have two types of assignments: eligible, active. We did talk about it. Deploying privileged identity management. You can see here, this is just a calculation that they're doing that. Okay, so this basically starts with knowing all the users that you have, and it says that, okay, global admin, there are 93 eligible, password admin, 5 eligible, service. So this is just number of employees we are eligible. And then the persistence, that what is the persistence of it, and reduction on that. That's it. This is PIM for Microsoft Entra ID roles. So you can configure Microsoft Entra ID roles, PIM, and then you can decide all of this, that whether MFA will be done on activation, what will be the maximum duration, does it require conditional access, justification, ticket number, require approval, assignment, all that is there. And similarly, PIN for Azure roles also is there. The same capabilities you can configure here also. That's it. PIM for groups, I will explain all of this. That's it. PIM for groups considerations, some considerations are there. This is how PIM dashboard looks like. This is basically for admins. Admin can see this dashboard. User will also be able to see a dashboard in which user will see how many roles he or she has activated, how many roles he or she is eligible for, how many roles are nearing expiration. User related information will be shown. Admin will be able to show all the roles that got activated in the last 7 days, PIM activities which has happened in the last 30 days, how roles are getting assigned. Or for example, you can see global reader role was eligible for one person and it was activated 744 times in the last 30 days. I'm saying if this is coming for last 30 days, because on the top of the dashboard, you will select the duration. So that's how it happens. Then you do access reviews. I will talk about access reviews also, that how do you do access reviews and all that. So that's about PIM. So we will cover every minute aspect of PIM, which is there in PIM portal. Every option, every checkbox, every verbiage which is there, we will cover it end to end, so that once you're out of this session, when you go back to your business and you will tell somebody that you've learned PIM, There should not be even a single question that you don't have a ready-made answer for. You should be able to promptly talk about that situation and also talk about the remediation or the process that needs to be followed. That's what the ultimate goal of using this exercise is. Okay, so that's all about the presentation part. We will now go back to the portal and we will do the demo. So I already have a demo configured. However, I will do it from scratch so that you will understand the process. Few things I have configured already to save time. Few things I will show you from scratch. That's what we're going to do. So before we get into the demo, we'll take a break to make sure that we are able to, we are able to consume and understand whatever we have learned so far, and then we will get into the demo. So I'll give you demo for an hour, and I will give you another hour to practice it yourself, to perform it yourself, to replicate that yourself. While I'm giving the demo, please make sure that you watch the screen carefully, see how I am configuring all these options, because I will divide the demo into two parts. First, admin configuration, second, user experience. So first I will do all admin configuration, then I will show you end user experience with all the probabilities, with all the permutations and combinations. And while I do that demo, I will also show you the loopholes that admin may leave, and loopholes that a user or a rogue or a hacker or a user with malified intentions can basically exploit. So that's what we are going to do. Great. Let's understand the configuration part. All right. So while I deliver this demo, watch carefully, understand the concept. Then I'll give you sufficient time to do it yourself. And I will be right there sitting here. So you can ask me questions also while you are doing it. While you have any questions while I'm configuring it, you can also ask me questions then and there. Don't just wait for me to skip to the next step and then you probably talk about something which was already covered in the previous steps. So let's see how we do it. So when it comes to the configuration of PIM, the configuration is divided into two parts. This is admin configuration, and second is end user experience, or you can say end user flow. So there are two parts of this configuration: admin configuration and end user workflow. As you have already seen in the documentation, that when it comes to admin configuration, in order to configure PIM service, I would either need global administrator rights or privileged administrator rights. I would need one of these two capabilities in order to configure the PIM service that you've already seen in the document. So privileged administrator role or global admin role, that's what I need here to configure the PIM service. So I assume that I have the role, I have all the applicable role assigned to my identity. Now, as an admin, the configuration is further divided into two parts. First is Entra role configuration. Second is Azure resources configuration. And the third is groups configuration. Three parts. You know that we can manage Entra roles, we can manage Azure resource, and we can also manage group. Now, when I say group, this is common. Group can be an Entra role group as well as Azure RBAC group. I'm saying group could be anything. Entra role as well as Azure RBAC group configuration. So this is admin configuration, which is divided into three parts: role, Entra role configuration, Azure resource configuration, and group configuration. You can say security group configuration, which includes both Entra roles as well as Azure RBAC. That's the admin configuration. Then comes end user configuration, end user experience of flow. Now for end user, the first is licensing part that you already know. So in admin configuration, you require P2 license. For end user flow, no license required. It doesn't require any license. End user can use this service as long as they have access to Azure portal, as long as their ID exists in Entra, right? Now let's understand the end user flow. So end user, what end user is doing here, end user is basically navigating end user flow, navigating to PIM console, selecting one of the eligible role, roles, and then activating the role. That's what end user does. Navigate to the console, selecting one of the eligible roles that the user has been assigned to, and activating the role. Activating the role will trigger further approval workflow. May or may not trigger approval workflow, may or may not require MFA, may or may not require justification, ticket number, and ITSM solution information. May or may not require. If it requires, then this will basically go through, and let's say it requires approval workflow, MFA. If any of these is required, and once this is satisfied, perform requested or intended action, and request for extension if required. That's the end user flow. So end user will navigate to PIM console, select one of the eligible roles, activate the role. Activation may or may not require all of these actions. And once these activation requirements are met, then you will perform the requested intended action as an end user. And while you are performing that action, if it is taking time, and if you feel that your role is getting expired, you can request for extension if required. That's it. And when you request for extension, the same workflow will trigger, which is you request for extension. It may or may not require approval workflow. The same. So it will be in the loop. That's the end user flow. So first we will do the admin configuration, then we will go for end user experience. So let's start with the admin configuration. So for that, I will navigate to my Entra Admin Center. I'm on the home page of Entra Admin Center. I need to make sure that I have P2 license assigned to my identity, and I have global admin role or privileged administrator role assigned to my identity. So I'm Entra admin. I can quickly validate this information before I get into the role configuration to avoid any surprises or roadblocks. So I will select my user, Entra admin. I'll check what all permissions do I have. First license, great. I've got P2 license, assigned roles. Since PIM is an Entra service, I will need access at the Entra role, which is global admin. So I have global admin role, which is more than sufficient to perform this activity. If I don't have global admin role, if my job is to only manage PIM service, then I can also be assigned by global admin, by my global administrator, this role, which is privileged role administrator. This role. There is another role which is privileged authentication administrator. I need this role. privileged role administrator to configure the PIM service. So I can have one of these roles. So I satisfy this requirement also. Now I will also need to configure Azure assignments. I will also need to configure for Azure roles. For that, I would need a minimum of subscription owner, resource owner, or user access administrator role. So I'll check what role do I have at Azure. So on Azure, I have owner role and user access administrator role. If I have owner role, I don't need the user access administrator, but I have both the roles here, right? Why do I have the second role? The second role is coming from here. This second role is coming from this checkbox. It says Entra admin. This user can manage access to all Azure resources and management groups in this tenant. Can manage access. It can provide and revoke access to all Azure subscriptions and management groups in this tenant. So in this tenant, we only have one subscription, which is Azure Pass sponsorship subscription. There is no management group. Management group means collection of multiple subscriptions in a container, which is a management group. So that instead of managing the subscriptions individually, you can manage the security controls, configurations, and enforcement at the management group. So because of this checkbox over here, I'm able to see that I've got user access administrator role at the root, which includes all the subscriptions in this tenant, all the management group in this tenant, and it says resource type root and the assigned to Entra ID. So I've got the root access, right? Even if I don't have this level of access, this one is more than sufficient. Okay, let's move on. So next is configuring the, so now we are done with the prerequisites. I have made sure that I have all the prerequisites with me. Now I will navigate to PIM service. There are multiple ways to navigate. In the search, I can search for PIM, which is Microsoft Entra ID Privileged Identity Management Service. I can click here, or under identity governance. This is part of identity governance. Under identity governance, I will also see privileged access management, privileged identity management service. So I will put a star next to this service to make it favorite, so that every time I expand identity governance, this catches my attention that this is what I do most of the time. So I will click on privileged identity management. This is how I see privileged identity management service dashboard. This is the UI. The UI is common. The configurations are common. Whether I do it from Entra Admin Center or whether I navigate to PIM service here. In the Azure portal, the UI will remain the same. You can see the UI is same. It's just that here it uses this tree structure wherein you can expand it, and here it is not like this. So it is the same UI. You can do the configuration wheresoever you wish. Since we are prioritizing Entra Admin Center right from day one, I will do all the configuration from here. Okay. Now, in order to do configuration, I would need to have some identities configured, some role configured that I will grant access. So to keep it easy, what I have done some pre-work here. That pre-work is I have created some roles. I have created some identities. I'll show you those identities now. So I'm using both the portals simultaneously so that I can show you some information from here and there. So if I go to users, you will find that I have created some users. I have these users. So instead of giving them a name, I have probably assigned them some role. I'm saying the name reflects their role. So I have 3 users. You can see I have a compute admin user. I have a network admin user. I have a storage admin user. I have got 3 users here: compute admin, network admin, and storage admin. They are my cloud operations team users. Right? So let's understand the end user or identities. So these are the identities in scope for which I'm configuring the PIM service. So I basically have 4 identities here. For these 4 identities, I'll show you the PIM service configuration. my first identity in Azure. For Azure resources access, I have 3 identities, which is compute admin. These identities are my people. So instead of giving them a human name, I have just kept it like this: compute admin, storage admin, and network admin. And similarly, for Entra roles, I have created an identity which you will find here, which is Entra SME. So there is one identity with the name Entra SME. This is my Entra identity. So these are my identities in scope. For Azure Resource Management, I have created 3 users: compute admin, storage admin, network admin. And for Entra resources, I've created Entra SME. This is my user identities. I have also created group identities that I will manage. So this is my user identities. Then I've also created group identities. So my group identities are cloud operations. So I've created a cloud operations group identity. And to this identity, I have assigned 3 users. I've assigned some members. You can see here: compute, network, and storage. So it's like there's a cloud operations team. In that team, you have multiple members, and they have been designated based on their roles. So there are some employees in that team who are more expert, who have more expertise into compute administrations, some expertise in network, some expertise in storage operations, right? And they all are part of cloud operations. So I've created a security group with the name cloud operations, wherein all of these identities are there. And similarly, there's a security group for Entra operations also, which is Entra operations. And in this group, I have added Entra SME as member. Now, you will always have less number of resources in Entra as compared to Azure operations, because in Entra, there is one service that you manage. In Azure, you manage 200 plus services. So there will be more employees. So I've created the security group Entra operations. In future, if somebody joins as part of Entra team, I will have that user added to this group. Similarly, in future, if somebody joins in cloud operations, I'm saying Azure operations, I will have that member added in this group, which is cloud operations. So this is my pre-configuration. So I've created 2 group identities. One is cloud operations. The other is Entra operations. Is everyone with me so far? This is all pre-work that I have done so far. Are you with me on this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now this pre-work is complete. Let's go ahead and do the configuration. So we will start with Azure configuration first. We will first configure for Azure, then we'll come to Entra, then we will look for group configuration also, because I can configure Azure resources, Entra roles, and group also. So if I start with here, I'm saying if I go back to the portal, over here, you can see I have 3 options here under manage. This manage is for admin, PIM admin, privileged role admin, or global admin. So I can configure Entra roles, I can configure groups, and I can configure Azure resources. These are the three things that I can configure. So I will start with Azure resources. Now, when I click on Azure resources, it will ask me to choose which resource in Azure I'm going to do this configuration. If I say that I'm going to do this configuration for management group, it would include all subscriptions which are part of that management group, all resource group which are part of those subscriptions, all resources which are part of those resource groups. So this is the top level management group. If I'm doing it for, let's say I'm not doing it for management group, I would rather leave management group part. I say that I'm doing it for a subscription. So if I'm doing it for a subscription, it will populate all the subscriptions which are there. So I'll select my subscription. Now all the resources in this subscription, I'm configuring the PIM service for. If I say that I don't want to do it for subscription, I probably want to do a lower level configuration based on resource group, then I can select a resource group from the drop down. These are all the resource group which are there. So I can select a specific resource group, let's say SC300 TCS, which contains most of the resources. If I further say that I don't want to do it for the entire resource group, I am primarily looking to do this configuration for a specific resource, let's say for a virtual machine, then I can select that resource also. That's how I can select my scope, that what exactly am I going to configure PIM service for which resource, whether it's a management group, whether it's a subscription, whether it's a resource group, whether it's a resource. I will need to select all of it. Once I select this, then I will click on manage resource. Right now, what I have selected is the VM. So whatever roles that I'm going to configure, whatever PIM I'm going to configure is going to be for this VM. It's a deep down, but let's not get into here. Let's clear all the selection. First, understand the concept at the subscription level. So I will select my resource as subscription right now, and I'll say that I want to configure PIM for this subscription, which includes all resource groups, which includes all resources. So after I select my scope, I will click on manage resource. As soon as I manage resource, this view will change. So I'm saying manage resource. I've selected the subscription. Now I'm managing resources. Now you can see the view has changed. Now here I can see admin view. This is admin view and my view. A privileged administrator could also be an end user. So if it's an end user, I will see my view. It shows my role activation. If I'm also eligible for some role activation, for example, global admin. I'm a PIM admin, but not global admin. Sometimes I also need global admin role to perform some elevated access. So for that, I will see my view. And this is admin view, which is right now the view that I have. So right now I'm in Azure Pass sponsorship, which is my scope that I'm going to configure PIM service for. So the first thing that you will do once you select your scope. So I'll also write it down on this document, these steps. So step number 1, select scope to configure. You will select the scope. It could be Entra roles. It could be Azure resources. And when it comes to Azure resources, it could be a management group. It could be subscriptions. It could be resource group. It could be a resource. These are the 4 scopes within Azure. You have resource, and so scopes to configure Entra role. I will say this is big quotes here, and then groups and groups. This is what you see here. So my scope is 3 scopes. I have Entra roles, Azure resources, or group. These are the 3 scopes. So what I have selected right now, I have selected Azure resource as my scope. And in Azure resource, I have selected subscription, where I'm configuring the PIM service for. Right? I am configuring it at the subscription level. Next, this is my first step. after I select the scope, after scope selection is complete, then the step number second. In the step number second, if we go back to the portal, you will see these options. So whatever you will do under manage only as an admin. So I see roles, I see assignments. So I see roles and assignments here. I will configure the roles and assignments. So I will click on roles. When I click on roles, I will see all the roles which are available in Azure. Now this basically shows all the Azure subscription role. This is not Entra role. Don't just get confused with this green color logo because you know that the green color, light green, is for Entra. No, these are all Azure roles. It does not even include one Entra role. If I look for global admin, you will not find anything with global. If I look for security, if I look for any Entra specific role, let's say privileged, it is storage data. It is not Azure PIM role. I'm saying Entra PIM role. So you will not find any Entra PIM role here. Application, this is application insights, which is an Azure service. Desktop virtualization, which is desktop and application virtualization service, which is Azure Virtual Desktop. Microsoft Sentinel, this is an Azure service. So don't get confused. None of these roles relate to Entra. These are Azure roles because my scope is Azure. Now I will need to select a role that I will need to configure. So I will select a role. Let's say I want to configure a role which is related to databases, Azure SQL Pass. So I will select a role, SQL, and here I will see multiple roles related to SQL. Now the most privileged role out of these is this SQL DB contributor. This is the privileged role. So I'll select this role. I want to configure this role. So I've selected SQL DB contributor role here. And now, once I select the role, I will need to select the assignments for that role. That who do I want to assign? Which identity do I want to assign to this role? So now I need to select assignment, right? So what I will do, I will create one more identity real quick here for SQL also in Entra. So I'll go to users, new user, and I'll say, this is my SQL admin. I'll capture the password. So I'm creating this identity, SQL admin. Don't just go by the name and say it looks generic, but it's a user actually. All this information I can fill later on. That will be pre-configured. As a PIM admin, you don't need to bother about this configuration. This is the responsibility of user admin. So I'm creating this role, and you can see I'm not assigning any access to this person. I'm just creating the identity. So I've created the identity. I'll come here, refresh. And now after I have selected the role, I will click on add assignments. So here I will select the assignment, the identity. Who do I want to assign this privileged role, which is SQL admin? So I will select member. Now here I can select group also. Group I will discuss later on. Let's first understand the end user first. The identity, human identity, user identity. So here I'll select SQL, and I get the SQL admin user and select the assignment, right? So I've selected the member. I can select multiple members here who is part of my SQL admin team. I'm just selecting one member here, but you can select multiple. Next, then this is the main setting. Now, how do I want to assign this admin, this user? If I say active assignment, this will defeat the purpose of privileged identity management then and there. And that's the reason you see all this. I'm saying request fields are missing. You said provide justification. You will not assign active roles. At least privileged roles will not be assigned active. The role that I have selected here is SQL database contributor. It cannot be assigned as active. Active means permanent. So I would select eligible. Eligible basically means this person is eligible for this role. And then for the eligible role, I will select the duration also. It says the maximum allowed eligible duration is 1 year. Who decides this? That this is 1 year. I will show you where exactly this is decided. But right now, since this is 1 year for this role, I would be able to select when does the assignment starts and when does the assignment end. So let's say for this person, the assignment starts from next week onwards, which is I can select the dates also. I can select a future date also. I'll say from 30th of September, which is Monday. I the same date or future date also. And it will remain valid for 6 months, which is till March 30th, March 31st. That's how I can select the start date and end date for this eligible assignment. And the maximum is 1 year. So within 1 year, I can select any date. So I've selected it and I've assigned this role. Now I will see the assignment here. So after the role is assigned, when you refresh the screen, you will see it here in some time. After the role is assigned, you will see all the assignments here. Okay, so this is how you assign the role. If you want to see active assignments for this, in the eligible assignments very soon, if I refresh, you will start to see SQL admin here in some time. If I go to active assignments, it will show me all the identities which has this role assigned permanently. Active. I see them here. And if I see expired assignments, I will see all the eligible assignments that expired in the last day, in the yesterday, last 7 days, 1 month or whatnot. So that's what I will see. All of C I will see here, right? Okay, so that's how we select a role and assign. Now, where do we select the duration? Where do we configure for this role, whether when the user, now this user is eligible for this role, which is SQL DB contributor. So on a different screen, I will show you the user experience simultaneously so that you will see where we take the decision, how it will happen. So I'll go to in private window, type portal.azure.com, log in with this user, which is SQL.admin. At cloud experts.in. Next. I'll type the password, the temporary password for this user, which I captured. It will ask me to change the password. User is signing in. Now the user doesn't have any direct role. When this user was created, the user was not granted any role. User only have one role assigned, which is SQL DB contributor. The user doesn't see any subscription also. What user will do? User right now, if user searches for subscription, user will not find any subscription assigned to him or her. It's blank. So what user will do? User will go to PIM service. In the PIM service, user will see an option that says under task my roles. User will click on my roles, and then user will select out of these three, which type of role are you looking for? Azure resources. And then user will see in the active assignment here the role. It is not shown here, which means it is not assigned here, probably. Over here, unless it comes here, it will not be shown. It's not coming, so I will do it once again. Add assignment. No member selected. SQL. Sometimes it happens because of synchronization. I'm selecting once again SQL admin. I've selected SQL admin. I will hit next. This all I had selected earlier, so I'll just go with assign once again. I'm assigning the role to the member. It says there is already an existing pending role assignment request. So it's already there is already a role assigned, which means it is just synchronization. It is taking time to, synchronize the portal. So already the user is assigned this role. So I'll click on refresh and I should be able to see it. Probably I'll refresh the portal now. This is a common issue with PIM portal. Once you assign, it doesn't show so quickly. So role is already assigned. That's the reason it doesn't. That's the reason you don't see it here. And that's the reason when user is trying to see, user is also not able to see here. But that's okay. Let's try and refresh the portal here also. The user doesn't see it here. That's okay. Let's move on to the next one. So that's how you see the assignments. Now we'll go back to the PIM portal once again. Azure resources, same process that you need to follow. Subscription, manage resource. Then you will click on assignments. Here you will see all assignments, the assignments that you have done. So you will see all the assignments. There are 4 assignments which are here. I don't see any assignment with respect to network. That's the reason it was not showing here. Probably it will come in some time. Okay, so it's not coming. That's okay. Let's assign one more role and let's see. So we'll go to roles once again. Add assignment. Okay, so I'll do the assignment once again for one more role. Let's say I'll select backup contributor. So I'll select this role backup contributor and I add assignment here. For backup contributor, I'll select member and I'll probably select, let's say, Romil itself. Romil as my backup contributor member. I'll select a role. Next, eligible, maximum is 1 year by default. I'll click on assign. So it is assigning the role. Service is working a bit slow, guys. Okay, the role assigning to the member is complete. So this role is assigned and it will start to show in some time. Okay, this worked. So Romi Sharma, you can see here, the assignment is complete for this role. Similarly, now the challenge with this Entra Admin Center is that once you are doing anything, you will lose the previous screen. So you will need to come back to the previous screen like that. So we have selected the role assignment. Now, if I go to assignment, I will see that assignment also. You can see here, backup contributor, Romil is there, right? It doesn't show the previous one, SQL one, that I need to figure out why it is not showing, or probably it will come in some time. But this is how we assign the role. Now, next is the setting. So, for example, it says that backup contributor is eligible for 1 year. Where exactly do you configure these settings with respect to how Romil will elevate this role? So for that, we basically go to settings. Here you will see all the roles which are assigned. Out of 405 roles, which is in Azure, in the settings, you will see all the roles which are assigned here. You can refresh and you will see all the roles that are assigned or updated, right? So you don't see backup contributor here. I'm saying it's all synchronization. It will take time, but we'll directly navigate to that role. Backup contributor over here. So here you see this role. Now here you will see the role settings that when admin has assigned the role, what settings are applicable for this role. This is where you configure the settings in terms of user experience, what experience user will have. So you will click on edit, and here you can configure all the settings. For example, when any identity to whom this role is eligible, when that identity activates the role, what will be the maximum duration of activation? Maximum is 24 hours, minimum is half an hour. So you can decide that it's a backup contributor role. Somebody is troubleshooting the backup service, and backup takes time. So I would probably say 8 hours. 8 hours will be the shift time of that employee. So even if the employee activates this role at the beginning of his or her shift hours, it will remain active throughout the day by the time employee leaves. So I'm keeping it 8 hours. Now, when the employee activates this role, what will happen? On role activation, nothing will happen. Employee will be able to activate this role. Azure MFA, employee will be providing Azure MFA, which means while trying to activate this role, employee will need to provide MFA challenge. Now, there is a catch here. If you have enforced MFA by default to all the employee, then employee has already done MFA while employee logged into the Azure portal. So further MFA will not trigger. But in a scenario wherein this employee, whosoever employee is activating this role, has not already done MFA, or in your environment, MFA is not enforced, it is voluntary, but an employee can skip MFA, then employee needs to do the MFA. Remember this statement. If MFA is already done, it will not further trigger for MFA. If it is not done, then this is MFA, right? Then Microsoft Entra conditional access authentication context. So this is conditional access capability. Then comes new, which is here, require justification on activation. If you check this box, employee will be asked for justification. Why are you activating this role? As part of justification, employee can provide a ticket number on activation, ticket number from ServiceNow BMC Remedy. An employee can also, and then it says require approval to activate. Do you think that it's a privileged role which requires approval? If yes, you can select yes, it requires approval to activate. The moment you check this box, yes, it requires approval, you will need to select approvers. So you can select approvers. Now, approver could be any identity. Approver doesn't need to have privileged administrator role. It could be any identity here. So I can probably select an approver. So I will select myself as an approver right now. But you can select a group which contains multiple approvers also. So Entra admin is my ID. I'm the approver here. So that it is easy for me to, because I'm already logged into this portal, I can easily show you the experience. So approver, I've selected. Then comes assignment. This assignment part. This is the role setting basically. This is where you decide the assignment duration, maximum assignment. The one that you were looking at role when we were trying to assign. It says 1 year. The maximum is 1 year, minimum is 15 days. So I would rather say 6 months. So 6 months is the maximum assignment duration when it is eligible. If I am providing permanent assignment, then permanent is 6 months. I can probably change it to 3 months. So for permanent, this is 3 months. For eligible, it is 6 months. And then it says require justification on active assignment. If somebody is assigning this role as active, the person will require justification. I'm saying the admin will need to provide justification why admin is assigning this role as active. And that's exactly what I was getting when I was trying to select active. It was asking me for justification in a box. So this is what you configure here. Require Azure multi-factor authentication on active assignment. Now, if I'm trying to assign a role as active, as an admin, I may require multi-factor authentication also. That's what this checkbox is. So this is where you configure the assignment duration or assignment terms. Next is notification. When this role is assigned, who will get notified? When this role is activated, who will get notified? All of this here. So it says send notifications when members are assigned and eligible to this role. So whenever PIM admin is assigning a member as eligible to this role, then the notification should trigger to these IDs, which is PIM admin, assigning, and approver all. So the So if I'm assigning this role to Romil, Romil will get an email that you have been assigned backup contributor role. Approver will get a notification that you have been assigned as approver for this role, and admin will get a notification that a further role has been assigned to Romil as backup contributor. 3 mails will go. You can put additional email addresses if you want to send. Next, send notification when members are assigned as active to this one. Now, when this is eligible, if I'm assigning somebody active, if I'm assigning somebody permanent, active role or permanent assignment to this role, then these notifications will go to the same person. Similarly, if I'm send notification when eligible members activate this role, this is the end user flow notification. When Romil logs into his portal and tries to activate this role, who will get the notification? Role activation alert will go to admin, requester, and approver. All the 3 persons will get the notification. So Romil himself will get an alert that he has just requested activation for a role. Approval will get an email that Romil has just requested approval for this role, and admin will get an email that Romil has just activated this role. These are the notifications. By default, they are all checked, and we can keep them checked and add additional email IDs if we want to notify them separated by columns. And we can also say critical emails, critical emails, critical emails. So that's the configuration. That's it. After you select all of it, you update the role setting. So for each role setting, for each role, you will configure the setting in terms of how critical that role is, for how long that can be assigned, both eligible as permanent. What will happen when that role will be activated? Will it trigger MFA? Will it trigger approval flow? Will it trigger nothing? All that you can configure here. So I've configured that for backup contributor role also. If I refresh, I will see backup contributor soon here with last updated date also. Okay, it's here. You can see backup contributor. Similarly, I have assigned a role which is SQL contributor. I'll go to that role also, SQL DB contributor. This was the role that I assigned. I'll go to this role and I'll also configure the setting for it. I'll click edit. It is expected that you configure setting. Now SQL is a critical database, is always critical to a system, to a company. So I would rather say maximum duration is 4 hours. And this role would require MFA. This role will require approval and justification, all that. And the approver is Entra admin. So I've configured all the settings here for this role. Next assignment. Since this is a critical role, I would rather say not more than 3 months, both critical as well as active. And if somebody is assigning active, if somebody is assigning this role as active to a member, then that person needs to go through MF. Notification, I'll keep it as it is and update this role also. So I've updated. So any role that you are assigning, you must go through the role setting, see if that setting aligns with your expectations, with your requirements, and accordingly update those settings. After you update this one also, it will also start to reflect on the top. So I'll refresh the portal once again. And I see it here, SQL DB contributor with today's date, last updated at this time and updated by Entra admin, the user with which I'm logged in. So this is where you do all the role configurations. I'll go back to Azure resources. And now if I go to assignments, I will be able to see all those assignments. SQL is still not coming. Maybe it did not get configured in the previous attempt. Sometimes it happens because of synchronization. So SQL is still not coming. I would probably try to do that assignment once again. So I'll select a role, SQL DB contributor. And this time I will assign that role to another person instead of a SQL DB, just to show you that how you can assign to multiple users. So I would rather say, let's assign this role to Gaurav Sharma also. So I've assigned it to Gaurav Sharma. And now you can see For SQL, I selected maximum duration as 3 months. So now I can only select 3 months of duration. I can give an advanced assignment for a week or 2 weeks from now, or I can do the current assignment. If I do current, then it will expire on 23rd of December, because maximum of 3 months that I've just configured. If I do active, I will need to provide justification, and it says MFA verification required, because that's what I have configured for DB role. That if somebody is assigning DB role as active role, the MFA needed. So I will need to do the MFA here if I'm assigning it. So I will say eligible. Active I will never do, otherwise it will defeat the PIM purpose. So I will say eligible, and I would rather, maximum is 3 months. I would rather say let's assign it for 2 months more. November 23rd it expire. Assign. So that's how I do the assignment for a role, and I will configure the settings for a role. It is getting assigned. You can see assigning members to this role. It is assigned. Now, if I refresh the screen, I should be able to see another column for SQL also. It is here. SQL DB contributor, Gaurav Sharma. So when I assigned it to the SQL DB user, SQL admin user, probably because of synchronization, it did not work. So I will do the assignment once again. I'll select the role, which is SQL DB contributor. I'll select the member, which is SQL admin, and select, click next. For SQL admin, I'll say that 3 months is okay. Assign. I'm doing assignment once again, and see if there is an issue with this. So something did not work right. I'm not able to assign it again and again. It says there is already an existing pending role assignment request. Don't go by this pending word that it is pending for approval. It is just that it's a synchronization issue in the backend, that for this user, it already has a request in the backend which is yet to get processed. That's the reason it is not coming, but for Gaurav it came. So in some time, probably in next couple of minutes or maybe an hour, it will be done. If it is not done, then I will need to, I have no option but to wait, because this happens sometimes. All right, so this is how that one is pending. Now let's look for the configuration for other roles that I've configured. For example, compute admin. What I have done for compute admin role, let's look for the configuration of compute admin. First of all, so compute admin is not the role, compute admin is the user, virtual machine contributor is the role. So let's see the configuration for virtual machine contributor role. Now, if I go to roles, I'm saying settings. If I want, roles will show all the roles. Assignment will show the users to which roles is assigned. Alerts, I'll talk about alerts and access review later on. Let's click on settings now. When I click on setting, I can see virtual machine contributor role settings. So you can see how did I configure the settings here. So this is the setting here. You can see for this role, the setting is role is applicable for 8 hours. On activation, let's click on edit and you will see the current setting. The current setting is that the role can be activated for 8 hours maximum. On activation, it doesn't require any approval, because I have shown you all the 3 flows, which is without any approval, with MFA, and with approvers. So it doesn't require any approval. However, it requires justification on activation. It requires ticket number. It requires approver to activate, and the approver is right now Entra admin. This role is assigned a maximum for 1 year if it is eligible. If it is permanent, then it is assigned for 6 months, and it doesn't require MFA for the assignee. That's how it is. Notification all the same. So since I'm not making any changes, I will just keep it like that. So that's how I have configured this role. Similarly, I have configured network admin role. In network admin role, if you see, so those 3 roles were configured, and I have actually configured them with all the use cases. Now you can see the portal started working slow. This is a known issue with PIM service. It works slow at times. And even if you refresh, it will not help. It will take its own sweet time. Okay, so this is for network contributor. You can see for network contributor, for this role, this is the assignment. Now I will need to refresh once again because this edit is not coming here. Okay, so close it. Go to privileged identity management once again. Go to Azure resources, same process, select the subscription, manage resource, then click on settings, select the role that you want to edit as an admin, network contributor, and then edit the role. So you can see the maximum assignment for this role is 24 hours. It requires MFA. Since MFA is getting done, it doesn't require any approval, but it requires justification and ticket information. That's how this is different. Then there's a third role, which is storage admin. In the storage admin, what I have done, virtual machine network SQL storage admin. In the storage admin, I have done another type of setting to show you the varieties. Storage admin is maximum for 4 hours. It requires MFA plus approval and all the conditions. That's what for storage admin is. So 3 different roles, 3 different settings that I have shown here. Right? These are the settings for the role. All the roles that has been assigned here, and 2 roles I have created in front of you in the session and assigned them also and showed you the settings. So this is the configuration that you do. Similarly, as a PIM admin, you can pick up additional roles based on the services that your users needs to work with, and you can configure them also. In the assignments, you will see all the users which are assigned to a role. For example, let's say I want to assign, so Romil, other than managing backup, Romil is quite good with SQL activities also. So I'm also assigning Romil SQL DB contributor role, right? How will I assign? I will go to the role, select the role here, SQL DB contributor. Right now it is assigned to Gaurav. I can add one more assignment and I can say, please add Romil also. He's quite good with SQL activities. So assign Romil also. Assign. Yeah. So Romil is the backup for Gaurav. Now you will see both Romil and Gaurav here. And if I close this and come back to the previous page, every time you need to select it. That's the flow, flow in the new portal. And if I go to assignments, I will find for SQL DB, there are 2 users, right? So that's what I will configure as an admin. Now, if I go to active assignments, I will also see all the active assignments and say those permanent assignments. So active assignments are also there. For example, you have subscription owner, you have Entra admin, Farhan. I'm saying when it comes to owner, these are the 3 identities which have owner access on Azure subscription. There are two identities which have reader access. Entra admin is user access administrator, and virtual machine contributor is assigned to Romil. So Romil has permanent assignment on this role, virtual machine contributor, and Romil also has eligible assignment for SQL DB contributor plus backup contributor. So Romil has those 3 assignments basically, right? That's how you see active assignments and expired assignments. If you feel that somebody should not have an active assignment, you can remove it here also. You can remove it or you can update it also, right? That's what you can also do. Here you see the expired assignments. So as an admin, you have the capability to manage this view, right? Now I'll show you as an admin. So let's say I'll go to the other view and the SQL DB instead of SQL admin, I'll rather log in with Romil account and I'll show you the experience for Romil, the end user. So Romil Sharma. Next. I'll type the password for Romil. That's another pain. I will need to reset the password for Roman because I don't remember his password. I'll reset the password. This is the temp password. I'll go and put this temp password here. Hit sign in. Put the temp password. Create new password. Sign in. So let's look at end user experience. We have seen the experience of admin experience when an admin is configuring the Azure roles configuration. Now we'll see end user experience. So end user will log in. There is no license required for end user. Navigate to PIM console, select one of the eligible roles, and then activate the role. So now Romil is signed in. Romil will navigate to PIM console, privileged identity management. And here, now Romil cannot work with this manage view unless Romil has appropriate access. So if Romil tries to click here, you can see it says assign eligibility is faded. Romil can activate the role if there is any role. Romil can approve if he happens to be an approver, and Romil cannot do audit. So Romil cannot assign, which means he doesn't have this capability, right? Now let's go back. So now what Romil will do, forget about manage. Romil will click on my roles. And here there are three types of roles: Entra roles, group roles, and Azure resources. So Romil has Azure resources assigned. Romil will click on Azure resources and Romil will see both the roles: SQL DB contributor and backup contributor. And in active, Romil will see virtual machine contributor role. That's how the assignment for Romil is, right? So Romil is able to see all the roles here. Eligible as well as active assignments. Now, Romil is now next as the next step. What Romil will do, Romil will select one of the eligible roles and activate the role, which may or may not trigger approval workflow. Depending on the role settings, this will happen. So I'll go back and I'll say Romil, let's go ahead and configure activate SQL contributor role. So Romil will activate, click on activate. Romil will see this tree, activation tree. Now it says because SQL contributor role is SQL DB contributor role is configured with MFA. If you remember, I'll show you in the other view. So if you go to this role, SQL role, I'm saying the setting of SQL DB contributor role. You can see Azure MFA. SQL is configured with Azure MFA. So on activation, require Azure MFA. That is why when Romil is trying to activate this role, it says additional verification required, and all of these items are faded. Rest of them are faded. Romil first need to satisfy this. If he is not satisfying it, he cannot activate the role. So Romil is going to satisfy it now. Romil will say click on continue. Now Romil will need to configure the MFA with Microsoft Authenticator. So it's already configured for him. So I navigate to Authenticator app. And I'll provide the code. If it was not configured previously, Romil would have to configure it from scratch. So now Romil is done with the MFA. Now he will be back to the same view. It will automatically take him back to the same view. You can see here. Okay. It says validating request. Done. Validation completed. Next part. Maximum duration was 4 hours. You can see. So Romil can only activate it for a maximum of 4 hours. So Romil says that I want to activate it, let's say, for 2 hours. Ticket system, you know that it requires justification on activation and require ticket information also. It requires both. So Romil will select the ticket system, which is, let's say, service now. Romil will type the ticket number against which he is activating this role and put the reason. Need to modify SQL DB, and Romil will type some DB name, prod US East SQL DB. So this is the DB name. Need to modify SQL DB configuration. If this relates to some change request, Romil can also put the change request, change request number, CHR request number, like this. Because this information will help the auditor, or will help if there is any misconfiguration, if there is any corruption, if there is any security incident that comes, this information will help in the audit investigation. So Romil says activate. Now, when Romil says activate, let's see what the configuration is there in the role. So role is configured for approvers also, which means this must be approved. And there is a member who will approve it. That is myself. So it says in the notification here, your request is pending for approval. This request is pending for approval. Now, what Romil can do, meanwhile, if Romil wants to check whether maybe probably a minute later, Romil comes and see, did my role approve? So Romil can click on over here. I'm saying activate. Sorry. Romil can click on approve. I'm saying my request. That's the next view. My request, and Romil can select the request type, which is Azure resource he was requesting, SQL DB role. It says SQL DB contributor, reason, request time, start time, request testers, pending approval, and action is cancelled. Romil can cancel this request also, or Romil can wait for it to approve. So now I'll navigate to the PIM admin. I'll say my own view. I'm logged in as Entra admin, and I'll show you where I can approve this role. So instead of touching this window, I will probably approve it from Entra portal, from Azure portal. So from Azure portal, I will navigate to PIM, and here I will see my task, which is approve request. So I'll click on approve request. I will also get a notification over here that that you need to approve a request. I will also get an email. So I will see approval request. What kind of approval request is that? That is not for Microsoft Entra role. It is not for a group. It is for Azure resource. So I select Azure resource, and I will see a request here from Romil. There we go. So there is a request here from Romil, which says SQL DB contributor. Requester is Romil. This is the start time. I can see the reason also, and then I have an option to approve or deny. So it says approve, deny, refresh. Refresh means if you're not able to see the request. So I can say approve. If I say approve, I will need to provide justification also. It shows me all the information. Now I'm approving it. So in other words, what I'm doing, I am adding Romil as SQL DB contributor for next 2 hours within this time frame. So I will provide the justification. Approved as required for change request. And I'll copy the change request here, and I'll say this is required for this change request to execute. As required for this change request to complete. Now, what some administrators do, they just put approve here. They just put one word approve. And during the audit, when auditors ask the question, when they get this in the audit log, they will get all of this information. So they'll pick up the audit log and they'll ask the question, why did you not explicitly mention why are you approving? Why is that approval needed? What was the context behind it? So you must make sure that in a production environment, when you're approving a role, always provide the context. Why are you approving it? Not because Romil is your younger brother, not because Romil is relative to the manager. I am approving because he is required in this role to work on this change request. And this change request actually requires some modifications on a SQL database. And for that, contributor level access is required. I need to do this exercise myself before approving a role. Because if something goes wrong, Romel is screwed, but at the same time, I will also be screwed. I will also be accountable for that because I am the one who approved this role. I'm the one who allowed Romel to, to break or corrupt anything. And remember, this role is SQL DB contributor. What is the scope here? Scope is Azure subscription, which means not only the in-scope SQL DB that needs to be modified. Romel can modify any SQL DB. That is why sometimes we create roles at resource level. And that's what Entra PIM provides, that you can select the scope, which is subscription, resource group, or resource also. So I'm approving it. I'll say submit. As soon as I say submit, the role will be approved. It says request approved successfully. It will disappear from my view here. And if I go back, if Romel, now let's see what Romel will see. As soon as this request approves, it will disappear from here. Romel will refresh, request gone. Now Romel will go back. Romel can see my roles once again. Now this time, Romel will be able to see this SQL DB contributor under active assignments as well, because Romel now has this role active for some time frame. So when Romel goes under active assignments, Romel will see that other than virtual machine contributor, which is a direct assignment, which is permanent, there is no end time. I also have SQL DB contributor role added, which is state is activated, and it is the end time is this, which is till 2:28 for next 2 hours. It is approved for Romel, and Romel can deactivate this role also. If Romel feels that I don't need it, Romel can deactivate also. If Romel's job is done within half an hour, there is no point of keeping it. Romel will click on deactivate and the role will be deactivated. That's what Romel will do. Let's say it is not Romel. So Romel forgets to, Romel is done with the job. Change was closed successfully. And for next 2 hours, this role will continue. And it's a critical role. So the admin can also do this. So as in PIM admin, I can go and see the current status of all the roles, right? As a PIM admin, I can go to Azure resources. I can select Azure resources here. I can go to any role and see the current status of that role. So I can click on admins. I can click on manage. This is for Azure. I can go to assignments over here, and I can go to active assignments, and here I can see Romel also. So I can see Romel here. Romel is over here. Romel Sharma. It's a activated role. I can see the state column where it says activated, and I can see that this is activated till this time. I feel that Romel is already done with this part. I can click on remove also. So as an admin, I can also remove the role prior to the completion of its end time. So I'm removing this role now. When I remove, it says when you approve a role, the role has to remain approved for 5 minutes. This is a new condition that they have set. It says the active duration is too short. Minimum request is 5 minutes. So before 5 minutes, as an admin, I cannot remove the role. But let's see, can Romel do it? I'm saying, first of all, in a production environment, this is unrealistic that within 5 minutes you're done. But even though, let's see whether Romel can deactivate. So Romel clicks on deactivate, validating request, deactivate. So deactivation failed. So this is another learning for you. The active duration for any role should be 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, neither the member nor the admin can deactivate that role. So this is a limitation that PIM service is putting on you, right? This is another thing that you need to remember. Okay, now we need to wait for 5 minutes, then we can deactivate this role. So this is the end user experience. Now with this role in place, SQL admin role in place, Romel can go to Azure SQL PaaS service. This is SQL service in Azure, and Romel can work with any databases. Romel can create databases because with administrator role, Romel will be able to do all of it, right? So that's the concept. We are not going to show how a SQL database is configured. The purpose of this demo is to more understand the PIM capability, right? That's how it works. Now, at any point in time, let's understand the admin once again. So at any point in time, if admin feels that there is a user who has just moved to a different team and that user doesn't require any role. So for example, Roman has moved to a different team. So I can also remove him from here in the eligible assignments. I can also update his assignment. I can click on update and here I will be able to change the duration for his role, the end date for his role, keeping 3 months in mind. That's one thing. Second thing, I can also make him permanent. If I make him permanent, I will need to do MFA because it requires MFA. Or I can remove his role also as an admin. So that's what I can also do. I can remove his role. It says, are you sure you want to remove assignment of Rohit from SQL DB? Yes, no. So I can do this also. I can do it for any of the member here. So this is how I can add more roles to the PIM service, assign members to those roles, create role settings with respect to what will happen when that role is activated by the member, whether member requires approval, whether like MFA is needed, whether nothing is required. I can see all of it, right? Now that's what I will do as an admin. And I have also shown you end user, that how it impacts the end user based on the role. So if there is any role that requires nothing, for example, I'll show you another thing simultaneously. Let's see if there is any role that doesn't require any approval, then what will happen? Or doesn't require anything, then how the user experience will be. Let's see it real quick. Was it network contributor? No, it requires MFA. Was it storage account contributor? It also requires MFA. Was it? No, it's not SQL DB. Network, what is virtual machine contributor? Yeah, virtual machine contributor doesn't require anything. It doesn't require anything. So what I will do, I will quickly assign Romil virtual machine contributor role and show you how he can activate it without requiring anything. But it doesn't require, it says on activation require none, but it requires approval at least. It doesn't require MFA, but it requires approval. So it will trigger an approval workflow. I'll quickly create one role and show you how it works for no assignment. So I'll click on roles, add assignment. I will select a role, let's say policies there. There is a role for policy service, resource policy contributor. I select Romil as a member for this role. Eligible member. Click on next. I'll just go with the default settings and assign this role to Romil. Policy contributor. Role assignment completed. I will go to the assignments and I should be able to see it here. Yeah, resource policy contributor. Now I'll go to this setting of this role. I should see it here in some time. Still loading. Not showing. Refresh the screen. This is a lab environment, a demo wherein I'm moving too quick. In a production environment, you don't do like this. So you don't see it here yet. So I'll directly go to policy, resource policy contributor, click on edit. And I would say it doesn't require on activation, it doesn't require anything. And it also doesn't require any approval, right? However, it requires ticket information and justification. Two things it requires. I'll say assignment. I'll just go with the default information, notification and update. Done. Full assignment completed. Unless it comes here. Okay, it came here. Now It is assigned to Roman. I know it is there assigned to Roman. Policy contributor Roman, and I already am logged in with Roman. So I'll just refresh the screen. Now I'll navigate to PIM service to see if that role reflects my roles, eligible assignments. It should reflect here under Azure resources. See, it's reflecting resource policy contributor. Now I'm activating this role. See, this time it will not trigger any approval workflow. It will be automatically approved. However, it requires ticket number and justification. So I'll say I want to activate it for 4 hours. I'll say ticket system is ServiceNow, or let's say BMC Remedy. If I'm working with multiple customers, they may have separate solutions. Provide some justification. Need to assign a policy. And I will click on activate. See what will happen here. It will not trigger any approval workflow. It would just go through these 3 stages, which is processing your request, validating that your activation is successful, activated completely, and then it will also sign you out and sign back in. Why it will sign you out and sign back in? So that you will get that capability. So this will take probably less than a minute to complete. Now this will trigger an email to the admin and to this user only, not to approver, because there is no approver in this case. So stage 2. Why it takes time? Because it is creating a log in the audit history actually for this request. That's the reason it takes time. Done. We are done with stage 2. Stage 3 done. It will sign out and sign back in. It says refresh in 1 second. See, Romil is signing out and it will automatically sign him back in. He's signed back in. Now this role will be shown under active assignments. See, resource policy contributor activated, and the end time is this. And similarly to the admin also, this will be shown. As an admin, if I want to refresh the screen, if I go to active, I will also see that now Romil has activated resource policy contributor role. It is here activated. This is the end time. And if I want, I can remove it, but I will need to wait for 5 minutes. It's trying to remove. Let's see if it requires, if the 5 minutes condition is applicable here. Yes, it is. So a role must be activated for a minimum of 5 minutes, nor the user and administrator. None of them can remove that role or user cannot deactivate. Administrator cannot remove the role within 5 minutes. It has to remain activated for a minimum of 5 minutes. Why this limit is? So that you're not unnecessarily playing with this service. You're using it for a reason when you actually need it. And you also understand 5 minutes is a very short duration for somebody to complete an activity. So that's how without an approval flow is all about. So this is all about roles and assignments. Now, what I want you to do, I want you to practice this part today in your spare time. And also in the next 20 minutes up to certain extent, whichever you can. And then I will talk about tomorrow when we start the session, we will talk about how as an admin I can manage the remaining part of it. The remaining part, which is Microsoft Entra roles and group roles. Entra roles concept will almost be the same as Azure resources. Group is a bit different. So tomorrow when I start the session, I will start with Entra roles. Then I will move on to the groups. Once I'm done with all of it, then I will talk about the next part, which is additional activities that as an admin I can do, which basically relates to access reviews, which basically relates to audit history, that what else I can do. So in case of Azure resources, what all options I have as an admin available to me, which is, you can see here, which is I can configure alerts, because you will always find more activations on Azure as Entra. Entra roles will be needed for limited period and the frequency will be very less. But in cloud operations team, you will find users activating the role every now and then based on the tickets that they are working on. So I will show you about alerts tomorrow. I will talk about access reviews. I'll talk about additional activities that I can do as an admin, which is how I can do an audit, how I can perform, how can I look into the activity log that who is doing what, and my audit also. I will talk about this tomorrow for Azure resources as well as for other views also. So if you go to Entra rows, the view will change a bit. Here it will say access reviews, resource audit, and my audit. And similarly, if I go to groups, then I will have a different view altogether here. So I will show it for everyone that how it will work. Tomorrow in the first half, we would have completed this activity and we would have moved to the next topic, which is agenda for tomorrow. Resume with PIM, cover Entra roles, groups, and additional admin tasks. Start with entitlement management. That's the agenda for tomorrow. I'll take a pause here. I'm open to questions if you have any, and you can start with your provisioning activity now. You can ask questions if there was any that came to your mind while I was giving you this demo. If you need any information, I can share it with you. Probably I can put that into the chat window. That will help you to configure from your end. It says select scope to configure Entra roles, resource group and group, and then add assignment, add role, assignment. As part of add role assignment, select role and select role, select identity. Identity could be user or group. Select assignment type, which is eligible and or active, which is basically permanent. Select duration, etc. That's what step number 2. Step number 3, after you select it, navigate, or let's say select role setting, configure role settings, that is duration, approval conditions, notifications, MFA. It comes under approval conditions, approvers, and notification. That's it. This is a 3-step process for admin. And for user, I've already shown you how it works for user. I'm open to questions, guys, if you have any. Okay. If there are no more questions, we can close the session for today. As discussed, I would expect you to practice it yourself in your spare time. You have all the controls, your P2 license, all of you. Please practice it yourself. If you have any questions, if something doesn't work as expected, take a screenshot, discuss it with me first thing tomorrow. And then as per the agenda for tomorrow, we'll continue with PIM roles for Entra as well as for groups. And then we will look at additional admin tasks that an admin can do from the audit perspective, from the reporting perspective. And then we will be starting with entitlement management, which is another Entra ID governance capability. That's the agenda for tomorrow. Thank you, all of you. You have a great rest of the day.